weeks, Ray merged his love of birding with his 40 years experience in broadcasting to create the Talkin Birds radio show. And there's no G in talking, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it's a great show, and I encourage everyone to listen. The show now airs on 17 stations in New England and New York, and is also delivered by live stream and as a podcast. Talkin Birds enjoys an audience response from listeners all over the US and Canada, and from more than a dozen other countries around the world. I know they have a great website too. So we're excited to have Ray join us. And yeah, you could go ahead and share. Oh, Susan, just go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
We got this. Now, share. Yeah.
Okay, share. Okay. Thank you so much, Kathy. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be with all of you in beautiful Florida, even though we're in beautiful Boston here. It's about 57 degrees, not bad. And we're actually going to be in the low 80s, I'm told, next week, at least for one day. Let's see how long that lasts. So we're starting off our little presentation here about just some highlights about bird migration. And we'll see the other subtitle. This is one of the titles for the program that we rejected. We figured that wasn't quite, original enough. What else did we think of? Yeah, migration, not for acrophobics, because I guess we know that a lot of birds fly really, really high. Think of the bar-tailed geese flying over the Himalayas or the Himalayas at something like 23,000 feet. But in any case, we decided that we would come up with a more descriptive name for our little presentation here and just call it the magic of migration and the hazards of the journey. Of course, migration isn't really magic. It just kind of seems that way with the incredible feats that so many birds are able to accomplish. So other creatures migrate, of course, whales, monarch butterflies, African elephants are some of them. And then there are tourists from Boston who come down to Florida and clog up all your roadways, all doing the migration thing in one way or another. So I guess the first question that people have whenever you talk about migration is why do they do it? Here's some interesting reasons possibly why they do that. They need the exercise. Okay, makes sense. Everybody needs exercise. All right, we can consider that one. How about they're tired of the same old tropical fruits? Okay, gets a little bit old. And up here, we like this one as a reason. They want to watch the Red Sox at Fenway Park. There's a real connection to Fenway Park here, if I may, just as a little aside here. This particular bird, the common nighthawk, I first saw this bird and heard it at Fenway Park. It was a night game, and a common nighthawk was swerving and swooping all around in the stadium lights up there. And it was a wonderful diversion because I think the Red Sox were getting clobbered in that particular game. So we were extra happy to see that common nighthawk. Well, for me, the first time to see a common nighthawk. But what about the real triggers for migration? What really gets birds to go from seeming to be happy where they are to deciding they have to travel, in some cases, thousands of miles? So these things come into play: rising temperatures, favorable wind patterns, length of daylight. But the one that's the really big driver, at least for birds traveling as long distant migrants, not so much for short distant migrants, but for long distant migrants, length of daylight is really the big trigger, actually causing hormonal changes in birds and giving them this overwhelming urge to take off and head at this time of year north or south in the fall. So it's an amazingly powerful thing that that drives these birds. And there's a word for it, Zugenruhe. So a German word that I think literally translates to migratory restlessness. So these birds really develop this sense that we've got to take off here. We've got to go. And this was demonstrated in a beautiful way back in the 1960s by two scientists from Cornell, the Emlyn brothers. And they created something appropriately now known as the Emlyn funnel that really demonstrated this migratory restlessness, this Zugenruhe, and the fact that birds know where they're going, even when they're in this little funnel. So this is placed inside a planetarium with a screen on top. So the birds can't fly out, but they can see these simulated stars above. And of course, in a planetarium, they can manipulate these star patterns to indicate directions, and the birds will recognize this. So the Emlyn funnel has a little ink pad at the bottom, that blue or purplish part you see there. So the birds will be stepping on that, getting the ink on their feet. And then when they see the appropriate pattern of stars, will try to fly in that direction. And of course, they can open the funnel later and see the ink deposited on the side of the funnel, indicating which way the bird was trying to fly. And it would indicate they were indeed trying to fly in the appropriate direction of migration. So it was really kind of a groundbreaking thing to have that discovery made and have that real pure indication that birds, seeing those star patterns, knew which way to fly. You know, as we know, they fly or they migrate through many other sources of information, as well as stars and the position of the sun, things on the ground like mountains and rivers and coastlines. And of course, we're learning more and more about birds migrating by virtue of being able to interpret the magnetic field of the earth. So another question comes up: where do they get all the energy to do this, these incredible flights, sometimes of thousands of miles? I read something from American Bird Conservatory talking about Mark Twain. When he learned that he had to learn 1,200 miles of the Mississippi River, he decided that maybe he would just like to die instead. Of course, migratory birds fly sometimes triple the distance that Mark Twain had to do that to become a riverboat captain. So where they get all that big energy? From this big fat word. Actually, no, that's not the big fat word. This is the big fat word, fat. And birds gain a lot of fat in order to make these journeys. We can't do that, I think we all know, but birds can. They have the, I guess you could say, an uncanny ability, if that's the right word, to utilize that fat. So they're fattening up on berries and grains. Hummingbirds coming north now, gorging themselves on spiders and insects, and birds in some cases actually doubling their weight before that migration begins. It sounds counterintuitive, but they actually can do that. Here's a beautiful shorebird, Wilson's phalarope. And there it is before it has started to fatten up for migration. And here it is after it is fattened up for migration. Okay, that's a little kind of a fake photo there. We couldn't find a fattened phalarope, so we called in a little help from an elephant seal. Anyway, you get the point. So doubling their weight in many cases to make these migrations. So the question then, how does that help them cover long distances? Again, as I say, it seems pretty counterintuitive to be adding weight so that you can fly a long distance. Here's an example of what that looks like in one bird, this black-pole warbler. And as you can see, That's all subcutaneous fat there, all along the entire torso and up to the bill of the bird. And birds will not only add subcutaneous fat like that, but even add fat around their internal organs, which in turn, in many cases, are shrinking in order to enable that migration. So they do that as a kind of a double whammy of getting that fat and giving them that power to fly while shrinking their organs, making them lighter at the same time. So this blackpoll warbler does this incredible flight. We're using our local location here in Boston as an example, to Caracas, Venezuela, nonstop, more than 2,200 miles, flying right across the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, not being able to land on the water, they've got to make it all the way pretty much without stopping, unless they are lucky to find a boat that they can land on, which certainly does happen. But otherwise, it's that incredible straight long distance flight. Not all birds do this kind of what seems like a sort of logical migration to go up from, of course, this is in the fall, not spring, but going from the cold northern US or Canada down to an area near the equator. But some, like the Arctic tern, seem to like it cold. And they'll go from their breeding grounds way up in Greenland and fly not too near the equator or somewhere sensible like that, but all the way down to islands off Antarctica, where they will loaf during non-breeding season. So it's said that the Arctic tern actually sees more daylight or is exposed to more daylight than any other creature on Earth, because they're doing that seasonal thing, going up north at one season and coming back for the other austral summer. So being in the summer environment all the time, cold though that environment might be. Let's see what other migration champions we can have. There's the wintering grounds. The bar-tailed godwit. What an amazing bird this is. And this is a graphic indicating one of the flights of one of these bar-tailed godwits, going all the way from Alaska to New Zealand. And again, nonstop. This is a bird that cannot land in the water without perishing. So it makes that incredible nonstop flight for something like 11 days. And when we talk about nonstop flight, it's not gliding like an albatross. This is flapping. This is flapping for 11 days in a row for all this incredible distance from Alaska to New Zealand or Australia. In fact, in the case of this latest record breaker, the bar-tailed godwit, which was given the colorful name of 234684, just broke another big record I think it was last year, and traveled nonstop over the Pacific Ocean, 8,435 miles. Pretty good. And then there's the sooty shearwater, another incredible bird traveling these amazing distances. And this bird just staying out over the ocean and just staying out there. You see two birds depicted here, one off Canada, then swirling all the way down into New Zealand, another one going off to the west to Japan. But in both cases, just staying out there for months and months at a time, finding the best sources of food, of course, in the process. And this bird can travel 40,000 miles in a single year, just swirling and swirling across the wide Pacific Ocean. Just quite amazing. So that's obviously just a little tiny tip of the iceberg of what so many birds can do in their amazing migrations. and others, of course, heading in different kinds of migration, going from mountaintops to valleys instead of going from north to south, but all doing it in a way that, as they say, works for them. So that kind of brings me to the sort of subtitle of our little presentation here, and the challenges that birds face on migration, and and certainly beyond migration. The storms that birds encounter, of course, can cut short their migrations and cut short their lives very quickly, as happens to a huge percentage of all the birds that are migrating. And of course, as we all know, there are so many other survival challenges for birds, whether they're migrating or not. And since we just finished with March Madness, I thought we would make a little bracket here. It's not a happy bracket, though. It's a sad bracket, though, just showing some of these challenges to survival for birds, from cats, especially feral cats, but also domestic cats that are roaming free and killing a phenomenal number of birds every year here in the US and every place else pretty much on the planet. Towers, you have radio towers, cell phone towers, TV towers that birds crash into. In many cases, confused by the lights on the towers. A lot of work being done now to change the colors of those lights so they have less effect on birds. But of course, the great majority of those towers are still those blinking red lights that cause so much trouble for birds. Cars, birds are crashing into cars, and cars are crashing into birds. So many, many birds succumb to automobiles, traffic. And then windows. I think we all know about the problem of bird window crashes. There have been quite a few books written about it in the last couple of years. We've had Dr. Dan Clem on the show with us a few times talking about that. He has a new book about bird window crashes and what a difficult problem it is. There are solutions to it, but they are requiring some effort on the part of homeowners. Cats versus towers. Cats kill many, many more birds than towers. Windows versus cars. Windows really kill so many more. And probably between cats and windows, what we hear lately, cats kill even way more birds than window crashes do. I've seen, the numbers vary a lot, but I've seen up to 1 billion birds a year killed by window crashes just in the US. More than that with cats, estimates ranging from 1.3 billion to 4 billion birds killed in the US by cats every year. It's an astonishing number, and it often causes me to wonder how it is we have any birds, at least songbirds, still out there with all of these challenges that birds are facing. The biggest problem still for birds, I think most ornithologists would agree, is habitat loss. And when we're talking about migratory birds, we're talking about habitat loss down in the tropics where they're wintering and up north in their breeding territories. So we can see the effects of habitat destruction, clear cutting on the left photo there down in the tropics, and the erosion that comes as a result of that clear cutting. I'll talk a little bit more about clear cutting in a very specific way having to do with agriculture in a couple of minutes here. But so on the right, we see a northern temperate forest where all this area has been clear cut. So obviously you're taking away habitat for birds in those clear cut areas, and also creating these zones that make it that much easier for predators to access the birds that would otherwise be in deeper and more protected forests. And of course, climate change. Many scientists now say that climate change is the number one threat to birds, and it's inextricably linked to habitat destruction and erosion, and of course, the incursion of water into marsh areas where seaside sparrows and salt marsh sparrows and others are trying to breed and having their nests wiped out by rising sea levels, all connected, of course, to climate change, not to even, well, we will mention the idea that the timing of bird migration can be terribly upset by climate change, in the sense that birds are coming north after the insect bloom has happened, for example, in the northern areas. Some birds, we're learning, are able to adapt somewhat to this, others not so much. So I think we don't know yet exactly just how bad an effect that particular thing is going to have. Then there are some birds that cause problems themselves, and I'll bet everybody recognizes these birds. So on the left there, a parent yellow warbler feeding an insect to a fledgling brown-headed cowbird. Brown-headed cowbirds, of course, obligate brood parasites that not only lay their eggs in other birds' nests, but only lay their eggs in other birds' nests. Something that came from the days when the bison were roaming and they followed them across the continent and lost the ability or the interest in creating their own nests. And the tragic thing, of course, with little songbirds like this yellow warbler is that in so many cases, they don't recognize these foreign eggs in their nest and will brood those eggs and then feed the chicks. And you can imagine what kind of competition happens with a big cowbird in the nest competing with the tiny birds like this warbler. Some birds, and I think it's the white-throated sparrow, have fought back against this by building another nest on top of the original nest in order to discourage the cowbird. And there have been reports of several layers of nests as this back and forth battle carried on between the sparrow and the brown-headed cowbird. I read somewhere that of all the traded commodities in the world, oil is number one, and number two is coffee. Don't quote me on that, but I did read that somewhere, as they say. But it's a hugely traded commodity, certainly. What does it have to do with birds? Well, unfortunately, over the last, 30 or 40 years, maybe, coffee growers have figured out that they can grow coffee the way they grow corn or the way soybeans are grown. And that is to say, by clear cutting the land, that I mentioned earlier on about that clear cutting, destroying the environment for birds. And of course, in the tropics, that destroys birds as they come back to their wintering grounds there and find themselves with no habitat to occupy for the wintering season. So they grow this coffee that way, and this known as sun-grown coffee. Very efficient way to grow coffee. You can grow a lot of coffee that way and make huge profits in the process. Also, while you're using herbicides and pesticides and lots of fertilizer to make it happen. None of these things bode well for birds or many other creatures. But there's a thing called shade-grown coffee. Full disclosure, Birds and Beans is a sometimes sponsor of our show. So you see their logo there, but there are other brands of shade-grown coffee as well. And the symbol you see on the right is a really important one from the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, certifying this coffee as bird friendly. And what it really means is this is really shade-grown coffee. In other words, it's grown under a natural forest canopy. And these these kind of growing areas, which is the original way coffee was grown, actually attract birds. I know of birding groups that go to shade-grown coffee plantations to look at birds. I don't think any of them go to sun-grown coffee plantations to look at birds in that clear-cut, cornfield-looking place where they're growing that sun-grown coffee. Not that easy to get shade-grown coffee compared to others kinds of coffee. Some markets carry it, co-ops. You can get it online from Birds and Beans, and as I say, other makers as well. There's several out there now making that good shade-grown coffee. And you do have to be careful too, because sometimes there are coffee makers who will say their coffee is shade-grown. Maybe there's one palm tree where they're growing their coffee. So that's why that Smithsonian symbol is so important. If you see that, then you know that it's real shade-grown coffee, and it's really protecting birds in the neotropics. Just a few of the birds that, there's that logo, the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. Just some of the birds I'm particularly fond of, looking forward to seeing here, including the beautiful Blackburnian warbler. I always think of this bird with a connection with a woman named Phoebe Snetzinger, who made this her spark bird. And she ended up becoming such a fanatical birder. She broke all the records for a number of species seen around the world. There's a wonderful book about it called Life List that I would really recommend. I love the common yellow throat, partly because I live right here in the city, and I actually had one right in front of my house one day. So that was cool, but it's a wonderful little bird to see, making all that racket and still being hard to find in many cases, at least for me. And the American redstart, we have lots of these, I'm happy to say, around here in eastern Massachusetts. And another favorite of mine, and one that's an early arrival for as far as warblers go, the warbler that thinks it's a nuthatch, right? The black and white warbler. A very cool bird. Love to see that bird. And then, of course, the most beautiful singer, many people would say, the wood thrush. And of course, these birds have declined just pretty dramatically, sad to say, but we still get a chance to see them once in a while. How am I doing on time here? Probably. Okay.
You're going just fine.
Doing all right.
Yes.
Oh, I heard someone talking, but I couldn't hear what was said.
Yeah,
Okay.
This is Kathy, you're doing fine. You can keep going. You
All
got
right.
like 10.
Thank you, Kathy. I only have like 2.5 hours more of material. So actually, we're really coming to the end here. I just wanted to sort of recommend some wonderful organizations to take part in. And, most of the time when I give this little presentation, it's for people who are new to birds or aren't birders. So you certainly know about these groups, but I'm just a big fan of the American Bird Conservancy. I think they just do especially wonderful work in many, many areas having to do with bird conservation. And of course, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, maybe the premier organization of its kind on the planet. And somebody put Orange Audubon in here also, which I've heard of. And I'm so impressed with how many members you have. That is just really incredible. So we'll put Orange Audubon for all members who haven't renewed their membership, and it's time to do that. So I put that in there as a reminder. If I may, just a few things about our Talkin Birds show for those who aren't familiar with it, who might want to check it out. That was the other thing, was the other suggestion I was going to have, is to listen to our show. 9:30 to 10 on Sundays is when it's live. We live stream it, and it's available on podcasts and available through our website and on iTunes and all that kind of stuff. And just quickly, some of the features that we have on our show. This will only take a minute here, but we do a little featured feathered friend every week. So we'll have a rose-breasted grosbeak on one particular week, and do a little recorded sort of vignette about different birds and try to find out some interesting things about them to talk about. And speaking of interesting, we have our man, Mike O'Connor. Mike is the operator of the famous Birdwatchers General Store on Cape Cod. It's been there about almost 40 years now. He's our kind of resident backyard birding expert and a great birder. And he you know, some people like 10 by 40 binoculars, some people like 8 power. Mike goes for the really big binoculars. He's got them there, but you know, on Cape Cod, you don't need a scope when you have binoculars like that. But Mike is often referred to as the producer of the favorite part of our show. He is just fantastic, and he's a wonderful author. He's written a number of books. One called Why Don't Woodpeckers Get Headaches? Another one called Why Do Bluebirds Hate Me? Mike could never get bluebirds, and he's got some pretty good sized property that looks like it'll be okay for bluebirds. Never got any bluebirds until last week. And he got his first bluebird, and he sent me a picture of it. I should have it on here, but I don't. Let's ask Mike with the great Mike O'Connor every week on our show. And speaking of mystery birds, as you guys were earlier, we have a mystery bird contest every week. Give away some pretty nice prizes, including that shade-grown coffee, and Brown Bird Care is now our provider for bird feeders that we give away, and we give away some wonderful stuff from a place called Wisdom Supply that makes non-plastic items for school and office. And we also give away window collision kits from the folks at Feather Friendly up in Toronto on our show. What else? Quickly, a conservation salute. We do almost every show. We salute a person or an organization that's just doing some great things for birds and for the planet in general. And then we have our science corner, talking about various, new research going on with birds. And lately we've been focusing on citizen science projects. So in fact, this Sunday we'll be listing some more projects, citizen science projects that folks can get involved in. And there are so many of them. And one of the great things is that if you're an expert birder, there are citizen science projects you can do. If you're a neophyte birder, there are projects that you can do as well. And they're all wonderfully helpful to scientists in their learning about birds and helping them to conserve birds. And one other thing I wanted to just mention that's relatively new that we're doing, and that's a thing we call plurting. So plurting is a mashup of the words picking up litter while birding. And this was really inspired by folks in Sweden who started this thing called plogging, which was picking up litter while jogging. So we thought plurting would be a thing, and we did some graphics and that sort of thing. And we've invited people to kind of join with us in this effort to plurting. And we have the plurting pledge that we do, invite people to do that. And when they do that, we send them one of these little iron-on badges declaring you a proud plurter. And this coming year, by the way, we're planning to hook up with the folks from Break Free from Plastic and really try to do a lot more with the litter aspect, picking up litter, and trying to reduce plastic as much as we can. As I'm sure most of or all of you know, that plastic in our oceans is an enormous problem for birds and fish and mammals and for the ocean environment in general. So we try to do our little part in regard to trash and litter that finds its way into our oceans and reducing plastic whatever way we can. And I think what we have next is our closing slide. And there it is. That's our little look at the magic of migration and some of those challenges that face birds as well. So thank you so much for watching. And if there are any questions, I will make an effort to answer them, or I'll say I don't know, which is probably what I would say mostly. Or if you have any questions or comments or suggestions about our radio show, we'd love to hear those as well.
Thank you.
And you guys can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself too.
Yeah, there's a couple questions in the chat. Cindy wants to know, why have the wood thrush declined?
From what I know about that, it's really habitat loss, with just, agriculture, with building of more and more houses and big tracts of land. That seems to be, from what I understand about wood thrush, particularly habitat destruction, and sort of that's true, of course, for many, many, many birds. But those forest environments that wood thrush need have, really disappeared in many cases, or just become small enough that they just cannot support the birds who need that larger territory.
She also was wondering where she couldn't find bird collision items. And I did want to make a reference. I do believe we talk about that in our latest issue of the newsletter. There's I think it refers to the feather, the feather ones and some of the other tapes and films. So you could check that latest Orange Audubon newsletter that just went out. So
yeah, Feather Friendly is the one, as I mentioned, that provides the prizes that we give away. But there are others that do a good job. And be careful of with those is some of the purveyors of those things will sell you these kits with little decals you can put on the window. The problem is they have to have a certain density in order to work. So if you have some decals and big spaces in between them, that won't deter the birds. They'll still see that sky reflected and fly right into what they think is open sky, and it's a window. And I mentioned Daniel Clem a little while ago. Solid Air is the name of his new book. And I think he's pretty much considered the world's leading expert about window collisions and how to prevent them. So that's a terrific book to get. Solid Air. It's called. Daniel Clem is the author, and it also has a listing of many of those providers of the window protection kits. So you can see it on there. But again, doing an online search, a Google search, will find lots of that stuff too.
very good. Kathy, do you want to read your?
Deborah's. Songbird migration seems to be best in Florida in April and up your way in May. Are the songbirds slowly moving from our area up to yours right now?
In migration, you mean, or not territory expansion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they are. So we're seeing some of the early arrivals. We're like, everybody seems to be seeing golden crowned kinglets in the last couple of days, right nearby. We've also had some reports on some early palm warblers and yellow-rumped warblers. Although sometimes we have yellow-rumped warblers staying around here all year round, but it seems like we have some coming up in the spring. So right where we are, probably the second week in May is the really peak time, especially for warbler migration. That's the real warbler wave coming through here. We have a place just outside of Boston, a cemetery, Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is a absolutely beautiful place with trees of every description and flowers, and a pretty famous place here locally for warblers in the springtime. And Plum Island, if those maybe some have heard of that, up on the North Shore of Massachusetts, is another really great hot spot for birds. So pretty much year round, but especially of course in the spring for migration, warbler migration particularly. Yeah.
Good. Elias Linser mentioned that flap.org from Canada is who the Phoenix Audubon chapters partner with, and it has a very informative site. And I think I did read something from Phoenix Audubon on bird strikes. They do have a very good article that actually will pop up if you Google bird strikes and treatments, window treatments, and they do have an article that comes up that's very good.
Mm-hmm. So that's connected with the light awareness program, is that right, from Canada? Because I know they created that program for lights out in city buildings, which has also been employed here in Boston, I'm happy to say, and quite a number of other cities too. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be good if we could all kind of work on some of that during migration, keeping those outdoor lights off. That'd be good.
Yeah, keeping the lights off is another thing too that is so important. You know, birds get so confused by lights in many instances. As I mentioned before about the towers, how there's some work being done to mitigate the problems with those lights on towers, and still, complying with FAA regulations, which is kind of important too, at the same time.
I had a quick question about your radio show. What inspired you to get started with that in 2006?
Well, I was actually doing a radio program in Boston, a talk show, a weekend talk show on all kinds of, topics, whatever sort of came up or whatever was in the news and that sort of thing. So one day the topic of birds came up. This is a while ago, Kathy, so I don't even remember if I introduced this topic or if a listener did, but we got bombarded with calls from people wanting to talk about wild birds and birding. And it was quite eye-opening to see that. And I remember it so well because after the show ended, people were still calling. And I thought, there should be a program, not just one Saturday morning, but a regular program somehow, somewhere. And I kind of filed the idea away for quite a while, actually. And then one day I just thought, I'm going to try to make a regular program out of this, maybe a 30-minute program. And I kind of put together an outline thought. And I got one radio station to say, it's not the craziest thing I ever heard of. So we'll try it. As you can imagine, going to a radio station and saying, we have a program about bird watching, how about putting it on your radio station? And sometimes you'd just hear a click, and I don't know what that was, but yeah, it's a hard sell. But we've managed to convince some radio stations to try it, and I guess our claim to fame there is that we've never had a station drop the program when they started running it. So that's something that we're really happy about. And of course, with the live streaming, we don't have to have any radio stations doing that. And the same is, of course, true with the podcast. So we get a lot of feedback from all over, as I say, from folks listening to the live stream and the podcasts. I think this was I can't remember. Remind me if I'm not sure if this is while we had already begun the program talking about our audio postcards that we get from listeners, and we have one that will be airing shortly from Italy, and we have them from all over the country, and we're getting a lot of them. So we'd love to get them. It's a matter of just going out with a smartphone and describing birds you're seeing and trying to get a little bit of the sound of the birds, and they're really fun. Like a 30-second to a minute and a half length, and anybody who'd like to make one is more than welcome to. And you can just email the file to me, like an MP3 file. And I'm at ray@talkinbirds.com. And I believe you mentioned, Kathy, earlier, there's no G in talking. We did that, by the way. We didn't put a G in there so that it wouldn't sound like it was a show about, caged birds, like parrots talking or something. So we took the G out and made it Talkin Birds. And we like to say that if you try to go on the website and you put a G in there, you'll get a pet shop in Albuquerque. So you have to be sure to leave out the leave out the G for talking.
I always wondered about that.
Yeah. It's hard to convince people to drop that G. We keep emphasizing it a lot, but it doesn't always work, which means we probably should have picked a different name, but it's too late now. We're stuck with it.
That's a good name.
Very good.
Elise, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. She said, we could all flirt and be ambassadors too. And she loves your show. Just
Mhm.
mention to them
thank
what an
you.
ambassador is.
And her name is pronounced Eliz.
He
I
lives.
believe is right, because
Sorry about that.
because I know that she was. We had a mention of her recently, and I mispronounced her name, so I had to make sure that I remembered again. I hope I got it right this time. I think I did.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I encourage everybody to tune into your show.
Yeah,
Podcast,
it's very fun to listen
a
to.
lot of fun. I listen to it when I'm driving here and there, and it's always entertaining and informative.
Well, thank you so much. We have fun doing it. We really do. So hopefully that comes through on the show. We really do try to make it a fun show, I think, as you guys know, rather than something too serious. Although, we try to get we cover up the serious part with having fun, but try to talk about some serious things too, dealing with bird conservation and conservation in general. So we kind of think of it as a two-part thing, really. It's about birds and conservation.
Okay, well, I think that's wraps up everything. We thank Ray again for giving us
Yeah,
the
thank you. Great program.
Well, thank you, Kathy, thank you, Susan, thank you, Deb, thank you, everybody at Orange Audubon. I hope to get down your way before too long. May I come and visit?
Yeah,
Oh, and
Okay.
yeah,
come to our festival. It's November 30th to December 4th.
Oh, that sounds like a pretty
Yep.
good time to be
it's
down
a
there.
better time. Yeah,
Yeah.
a little cooler.
Yes, and
Yeah,
yeah,
bit
okay,
cooler.
yeah.
But yeah,
And for us, a little warmer, so yeah,
Oh, yeah,
it works out.
very true. Very
that's
true.
true.
Everyone, don't forget, you can tell your friends about this and watch it in a few days. We'll have it posted on our YouTube channel.
Mhm.
Share the fun.
Thanks so much. Thanks
All
so much.
right, thanks
All right.
again, thanks.
All right, everybody.